John 3:16 also highlights something about the sonship of Christ. Notice how it says that he gave his only begotten son. The Greek text states, osteton ion of tuton monogeny edoken. So there's two words here that you really want to have to highlight. Ion and monogeny, son and begotten. Because there's typically a debate today between people who believe that John 3:16, in this clause that he gave his only begotten son, some people will believe that Christ only became the Son because of the incarnation, whereas others will argue that Christ has always been the Son. And this is a debate between people who hold to two different doctrines. One is called eternal sonship. The other one is called incarnational sonship. And it's all based upon this Greek clause. Osteton ion of tuton monogeny edoken, that he gave his only begotten son. Now, regarding this right here, I want to highlight exactly what's the biblical position to hold. And I'm going to show you guys some flaws in the other one. Now, I believe the context is referring to an eternal intercommunion. I don't believe it's referring to Christ only becoming the Son because of the incarnation. So I do not believe in the incarnational sonship view, and I'll share with you why. People today who hold to what's called incarnational sonship, so in other words, they're going to argue that Jesus only became the Son because of the incarnation. Many of them are going to assert that if you hold to eternal sonship, then you hold to a doctrine called eternal generation of the Son. Now, I would bet most of you have no clue what eternal generation even means. And that's fine because most people don't. But I can tell you right now that is a weak assertion because it's not true. I know many people today. I know scholars. I know people that are just local church members that understand these doctrines very well. They affirm eternal sonship, but they reject the doctrine of eternal generation. Now, some of you probably have no clue what eternal generation means, but I'll explain what it means. It's a doctrine that's typically held by confessional people, or you would call the Calvinists today that hold to creeds and to confessions. But notice this about this doctrine of eternal generation. First of all, there's not a scholarly consensus on how to even define this. One scholar will say one thing about the doctrine. Other scholars will say something completely different. So don't assume there is a universal definition for it. Some time ago, I once loosely held to it without fully understanding how most of the well-known scholars have popularized it or how they interpreted it. But rest assured, I do not embrace this doctrine anymore. I reject it, I denounce it, yet I affirm eternal sonship. So let me tell you how people today define this doctrine of eternal generation. And I just want to make a quick point to tell you guys how people who hold to incarnational sonship, they assume that if you hold to eternal sonship, then you have to hold to eternal generation. That's false. Eternal generation are held by the guys who would say their Westminster Confession, or they hold to certain creeds. Well, they'll say that things like this. They'll say the Son is eternally from the Father, or they'll quote from the creeds where it says God from God, true God from true God, light from light. They'll use that language. Now, the reason why I don't like that language, because of the fact that it says eternally from the Father, we don't read that language in John 1. In John 1, the Bible says, it doesn't say that Christ is from the Father, it says he's with the Father. Remember that language. In proston theon. The Bible uses an imperfect tense, was, from, pros, the Father, theon. So the Bible here clearly tells us that before the creation of the world, that Christ was with the Father, not from the Father. So people who hold to this eternal generation, some of them will even say things like this, that Christ derives his being from the Father. Now, I believe that's heresy, plain and simple. Because any God who derives his being from another is no God at all. So that's why I could never hold to that position. That's blasphemy. But I think what these guys who hold to eternal generation, what some of them are trying to do is they're trying to say, look, to hold to our position, that's the only way you can affirm that the Son is the Son, that the Father is the Father, that the Spirit is the Spirit, to maintain three distinct persons while holding to one divine essence. Now, I would come back and say to them, look, anyone who tries to confound the persons or divide the essence, we call them heretics. So I fully believe that there is three distinct, co-equal, co-eternal, and co-glorious persons who share the same singular divine nature. So my response to these eternal generation guys is this. I can explain the biblical doctrine of the Trinity, a fully co-equal Trinity, without recourse to all of this derivative terminology that they use. So this is why I argue I could not in good conscience accept the doctrine of eternal generation. So I'm only making that a point to say I don't affirm it, and I know many other people that do not affirm eternal generation. Yet I affirm eternal sonship. Now here's why some of the incarnational sonship guys reject eternal sonship. Because they don't have a biblical definition for the word begotten. Remember the text here in John 3:16. That he gave his only begotten Son. Osteton ion avtuton monogeny edoken. This word monogeny that's used. If you were to talk to somebody today that will tell you that Jesus only became the Son because of the incarnation, here's how they're going to define the word monogeny or begotten. They're going to say it refers to origins, or by definition it means to have a beginning. Now that is a very sloppy statement. To say that monogeny or begotten means to have a beginning is extremely weak, and it shows that people that make these kinds of comments, I call them dictionary theologians, because they're finding a secular dictionaries and they're treating it as the way we are to define biblical terms. And that's their first mistake. If you want to define a biblical word, then you have to go to the Bible to do so. That word monogeny, I need to give you guys a proper definition for it right now. And what would help, though, is if you actually look at the original. And I'll explain it. I know sometimes I reference Greek words, but I never, ever say something without explaining what it is I'm saying. Okay? No one can say, oh, I'm just saying something, but without explaining what it means. Because, of course, I explained what it means. But that word monogeny in Greek, which is translated in the King James Version as begotten, let me share with you real quick how to come up with a definition for this word. You have to actually kind of spell it out a little bit, but don't conflate it with another word. I think these incarnational sonship guys are confusing the word begotten with the word beget. That's exactly what they're doing. Because they're assuming that begotten means to have a beginning, or they're going to say that begotten means origins. Now, what they're doing is they're conflating begotten with the word beget. And you're going to fail miserably if you do that, because it's not the same. It is not the same. As you guys know, Matthew 1 tells us that Abraham begat Isaac. This person begat this person. Now, this word here, begat, does refer to origins. But what I'm going to do is spell out a couple words real quicker so you don't get them confused, because beget is the Greek word egenisen, which the root word is the word genao, and then you have monogeny. So you want to focus on, since it's a compound word, monogeny, look at geni and look at genao, and you'll see it's not the same word. Let me share with you guys the Greek alphabet really quickly here, because I'm going to have to spell these out. Now, the Greek alphabet in the modern Greek is alpha, vita, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mi, ni, xi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tav, epsilon, phi, hi, psi, omega. That's a quick rundown of the Greek alphabet. But if you heard the one where I said ni, this is the English where we would say today is n. So n. Just remember that if I say ni. Now, when you look at genao, the root word, and then genis or geni, it's not even the same spelling. So genao, you have gamma, you have epsilon, ni, alpha, omega. So you have two ni's or two n's, put it to you that way. Guess what you have for geni? You have gamma, epsilon, ni, and eta. Okay? So it's not even the same word. One has two ni's and the other one only has one. So it's not the same word. This is the problem for the dictionary theologians. They're just going to some secular dictionary. Probably they have a couple and they look at that as if this is how you're going to define a word. And that right there just goes to show how sloppy their position is. But when you're actually looking at this word, remember, you have mono, single, and then geni. And this is one of the reasons why Thayer, rightfully, at least on this point, the lexicon, of course, state it's single of its kind or class. And that's so in other words, it's referring to an intimate, unique relationship between the Father and the Son. That is what it's referring to. And as proof of this, look at even how the word is even used for Abraham and Isaac in Hebrews 11:17. Do you guys know Isaac in Hebrews 11 is called Abraham's only begotten son? Now, the context is not referring to origins because he's not his firstborn son. He's not his only son. You know why he's called Abraham's only begotten son? Because it is a special, unique relationship. Why do you think God is referred to as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? It's not Abraham, Ishmael, and Jacob. It's Abraham, Isaac. It's covenantal in nature. It's referring to a unique relationship or the promises of God. That's what it's referring to. So it has nothing to do with origins. It has nothing to do with having a beginning, as the dictionary theologians will posit. The word monogeny refers to a unique, intimate relationship. That's how you want to interpret John 3:16, where it says that he gave his only begotten son. Now let me share with you another sloppy argument from the Incarnational Sonship guys. Again, the people that will say John 3:16 means Jesus only became the Son because of the incarnation. I actually read something recently where a pastor was saying that begotten means to be formed. And he said, and he actually cited Jeremiah 1:5. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. Please tell me that he's not going to degenerate to this level to absolutely come up with something so absurd. You know why? Here's why. If you actually look at Jeremiah 1:5, where it actually does use the word formed in the womb, formed in the Septuagint rendering of it, or in the Greek reading, uses the word plase, and it uses the root word plaso. Guess where this word comes from? Guess where you'll see this word also in the Bible? It's used even in 1 Timothy 2:13 for Adam, when it says Adam was formed first and then Eve. But that's not the same word we see in John 3:16. John 3:16 uses the word monogeny. How do you take monogeny and say it means plase? That doesn't make any sense at all. This right here is the dangers today of guys where they should spend more time learning about exegesis than they do about reviewing a dictionary. So this is just a few ways of how to refute their arguments. Now let me show you guys a text here, because I believe John 3:16 is referring to eternal sonship, that the Son has always been the Son. He didn't become the Son just because of the incarnation. He has always been the Son because of the fact that it's the Father that sent the Son. That's one example, but let me give you a text that you will find that most of the incarnational sonship advocates, they won't touch. And if they do try to touch this text I'm about to highlight, all they're going to do is twist it and demonstrate that they're not able to prove their point. All they're able to prove is that they know how to twist text, and they're able just to make up sloppy arguments to try to defend a position that is easy to refute. And the text I'm going to refer to right now is John 1:18. Because here's why I want to refer to John 1:18. Because John 3:16 uses the word monogeny. Monogeny. The same root word for begotten is even used in John 1:18. So if you want to look at it, you're more than welcome. But John 1:18 in the Greek text, it says, O monogenes ios, o on iston kolpontu patros ekinos exegisato. the begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him. Notice there, and I highlighted the Greek because I wanted you to see that the same root word that's used in John 3:16 is also used in John 1:18. The begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father. Now this right here is an exegetical masterpiece. It absolutely is. And I'm going to use some big words, but I'll explain what it means here in a moment. When it says who is, that's the English rendering. The Greek says oon, who is. Now, oon in the Greek text basically is what you would call a participial construction. Now let me use another terminology, some other big words. It is what you would call an articular participle. Now let me explain what that means. An article is something that points to something else. It's literally, it serves as like a pointer, like I heard many scholars say. It serves as a pointer. It's showing something specific. And then when I say something is a participle, it's saying something is continuous. So when it says here, on iston kolpon tu patros ekinos exegetical, who is in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him. This, what I call a participial construction, on, that's used, do you guys know here what this indicates exegetically? It indicates Christ's continuous being. It indicates or emphasizes his timeless existence, and it stresses the eternal communion between the Father and the Son prior to the incarnation. That's what it linguistically reveals. Now let me prove that, because I need to demonstrate that based on the exegesis, and here's how. Here's where you get into a little bit of linguistics. When the Bible uses this verb, this participle, on, who is, this verb right here that's used, where does it come from? That's the first thing you should ask yourself. Where does it derive? Well, it comes from the Greek word eimi. And guess what eimi is? This is where you get the I am statements. All of the I am statements in the Bible. So this word comes from the word eimi, I am, which you can see in Exodus 3:14. I am that I am. And here's what's so unique here about John 1:18 when it says, who is? It's a present tense stative verb. Who is? On, remember those words. On, that's the Greek words. You'll see those exact same Greek words, and you'll see that same present tense articular participle used in Exodus 3:14. The identical same one used in Exodus 3:14. Here's the Greek text, and then I'll share with you the English. The Greek text literally states, Ke ipen o theos pros moisin ego imi o on. You hear that o on part? And God said to Moses, I am that I am. So do you see here, you cannot miss this. This right here is a very, very important, again, stative verb that's used in Scripture. This on that's highlighted because it comes from this word imi, which it also, the same present tense participle is even used in Exodus 3:14. So this right here is an exegetical masterpiece from the author of John 1:18. Now, additionally, here's something else that you have to notice about John 1:18. Who is in the bosom of the Father. Now, this is a Hebrew idiom that's used. The word kolpon. The word kolpon that's used, bosom, is very important here because it clearly stresses intimacy. It clearly highlights an eternal intimacy between the Father and the Son. In fact, I was reading a Greek scholar by the name of Spiros Zodhiates. And I was looking at some of the ways how he looks at this word, and he argued that the word kolpon, or bosom, in John 1:18, who is in the bosom of the Father, he argued that it refers to eternal intercommunion between the Father and the Son. But he argued that it refers to an eternal relationship or an eternal intimacy between Father and Son. So this right here clearly demonstrates that he believed in what's called eternal sonship. He even argued how that word bosom, the Hebrew idiom, is even used in Luke chapter 16. Remember Abraham's bosom? You remember that? So clearly he would argue, Spiros Zodhiates argued this refers to an intimacy between Abraham as the father of faith. That's how it's used there, that same Hebrew idiom that's used, kolpon. So this is why I agree with scholars like Murray Harris on this text. Murray Harris argued that the on that's used, the who is in John 1:18, refers to the permanent presence with the Father, or it refers to a dwelling in communion with the Father prior to the incarnation. Exegetically, that's what this reveals. Now you have to be ready for the comebacks, of course, because the incarnational sonship guys, if they're sloppy in how they define their position and they only want to go to dictionaries to do so, then rest assured they're going to be sloppy in their responses. The incarnational sonship guys are going to say, no, you can't do that because it's present tense. It's present tense. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to go here to the text where it says, who is in the bosom of the Father. And they're going to say, well, that's a present tense verb. So that just means he only became the Son or the begotten Son, present tense, because of the incarnation. But what they're failing to realize in Greek grammar, that the present tense is used or stressed in many different ways. And you cannot, in this context, restrict it to a point in time. And I'll tell you why, because if you do, you're going to fall into heresy. It's used in the present tense, just like Jesus in the Bible said many things about himself that could only be said about God in the Bible, and many times he used the present tense. Are we going to say that means he only became God, and therefore he wasn't in the past? You see the dangers of trying to restrict a text to a specific point in time and neglecting the fact that the present tense is stressed in many ways depending on the context. So if they try to say, the incarnational sonship guys, if they say, well, no, it's present tense verb that's used in John 1:18, so this refers to Christ becoming the Son only because of the incarnation, here's how you want to refute them. First of all, remind them, the same present tense articular participle that's used in John 1:18, who is, oon, is also used in Exodus 3:14. Ego imi oon, and God said to Moses, I am that I am. Remind them of that. Now, what does that mean when the Bible says, I am that I am? What does that signify exegetically and theologically in the Bible? It denotes Jehovah's eternality, immutability, and his absolute sovereignty. That's what it means when he says, I am. May not mean much if you and I say, I am, but if God says, I am, oh, it means something. Here's why you can't restrict I am to a point in time, just because it's present tense. Look how Jesus used it in John 8:58. In John 8:58, the Greek text says, Prin Avraham geneste, before Abraham was, he used past tense. But then he says, ego eimi, I am. Same Greek construction that's used in Exodus 3. I am. So what was he doing? He's contrasting that Abraham had a beginning, but he has no beginning. And he used present tense. He used the present tense when he says, I am. That's why you can't restrict it to a point in time. What do you think I am indicates for Christ when he uses it in the Bible? Many times. When Christ says, I am, it indicates his self-existence, his eternality, his immutability, his consubstantiality, his impeccability. He's declaring to be the Jehovah of the Old Testament. That's what he's declaring here. And yes, it's present tense. So are we going to say he only became God, but he wasn't God in the past? You see the dangers of restricting something to a point in time? Additionally, that same verb that's used in John 1:18, who is in the bosom of the Father. The begotten Son who is in the bosom of the Father. When it says on, you're going to see that same present tense verb even used in Romans 9:5 when it says Christ came in the flesh, who is overall God. It uses that same participial construction. On, who is. And it's present tense. Are we going to restrict that to a point in time and say Christ only became God during the incarnation? probably one of the most beautiful texts in the entire Greek Bible, uses this same present tense verb. The Greek New Testament says this. It says, os on apavgasmatis doxiske hariktir tis hypostasios αυτού. Okay? This right here is that popular text from Hebrews, where it says, who, being the brightness of his glory, the express image of his person. Being that's used there is present tense. Who, being the brightness of his glory. It's present tense. Are we going to say, oh, that's restricted to a point in time, so Christ only became the brightness of his glory, but he wasn't before? You see the absurdity when it comes to listening to people who don't spend time exegeting texts, but they just want to look to a dictionary. This is what you get. You get absurdity. So the point is, John 1:18 deals with the eternal sonship of Christ. Similarly, John 3:16 does as well, when it says that he gave his only begotten Son.